It's been more than a year since a former data consultant at Cambridge Analytica blew the whistle on his firm for illegally mining the data of millions of Facebook users to help influence the 2016 presidential election. Well, his move prompted another employee from the firm, Brittany Kaiser, to come forward with more information against the company. Now in her new book, she sheds light on how companies use people's data to manipulate public opinion. Kaiser sat down with CBS News investigative reporter Graham Cates to explain how it's done.
When you go out to make a purchase, every credit card swipe, every individual item that you are purchasing is then recorded by your credit card company and also the store that you've gone to. Now, those financial institutions and companies are selling that on to wider data aggregator companies. So that's everyone from Experian and Info Group to even political data companies like Labels and Lists and Magellan. So once those data sets are collated, that company will continue to collect data on you from as many sources as they can gather it from, keeping that in a massive data file that is then purchasable or licensable by anybody that wants it. Now, you don't have to consent to this data being collected on you. Just by being in the United States, you have pre-opted in. The law doesn't protect you. So these companies can continue to collect data about you, continue to sell it, and allow it to be sold on and used for any purposes without your knowledge.
Pre-opted in is a really fascinating way to think about it. One of the things you hear from people is, well, you don't have to use Facebook, you don't have to opt into various services. But when you're talking about a company like Experian, which is a credit rating agency, there really isn't a choice. You're part of our system, and they're collecting information about you, ostensibly on the one hand to give you a credit score, but apparently also to sell that information. And what happens when a political consultancy firm gets it?
When a political consultancy licenses data, just like any company that decides to license data, they can then start to match that to your online behaviors and find out billions of things about you, to the point where they are able to so fully understand the way that you see the world and how you can be engaged that they can use that information to, I hate to say it, but manipulate you. You could say it's a persuasion campaign, but when you are showing people information that's specifically meant to affect your decision making, that sometimes is a little bit more manipulative than they like to put in their brochures.
At Cambridge Analytica, they refer to using psychographics to process this data and ultimately target people using Facebook for that kind of misinformation. How exactly does that work?
So that is psychographics, psychometrics, or personality modeling. Basically means that you are using extra data and usually both qualitative and quantitative surveys in order to understand the way that people think and the way that they make their decisions. So it's usually grounded in behavioral, experimental, and clinical psychology. And those different categories help you understand how a person sees the world, how they accept information, and then you can feed them creative pieces and advertising campaigns accordingly. Now, at Cambridge Analytica, the way that this worked, it was tested throughout the United States, and unfortunately, what they found out was the most effective personality modeling is when you feed fear-based messaging to people that were modeled to be neurotic.
There's a lot of neurotic people out there. So are you, at that point, you're not only saying we're looking for neurotic people, but we're looking for neurotic people in specific locations where the ad dollars will be best spent in order to get them onto one side?
Yeah, so what political communications firms will always do when they're using data is to be able to figure out who are the individuals who are most easily persuaded. So they're called swing voters. Companies call them switchers for brand advertising. And these are the individuals that might only represent thousands or tens of thousands of people in a swing state. And if you can identify just those people and exactly the way they think and what issues they care about, then it's really easy to start seeing those votes turn from blue to red, for instance.
What are you telling those people to kind of access their fears?
Well, what you're telling people is we understand what you care about and we understand what you might be nervous about. And so therefore, if you are if you are an environmentalist that is worried about climate change, you might start to talk about how another candidate is not going to protect the environment with their particular political policies. And so you start to play on people's fears. It might not actually be true that your opposing candidate doesn't have good environmental policies, but you start to tell the people that are about to go to the polls that you are the only one that can protect them from the impending climate crisis.
CBS News investigative reporter Graham Cates joins me now on set. So Graham, you know, it's remarkable always to hear them say this, just the reach and what they were trying to sort of pinpoint with this. But she said that, you know, just being here in the United States, you're already pre-opted to have your data bought and sold. How do you protect yourself then at that point?
Right now, you really can't. It was laid out pretty clearly. I mean, every purchase you make, really everything you do, because your cell phone's tracking you as you go around, it's all being collected and bought and sold, and there's no kind of legal framework to protect you from that. And that data has value, and that's one of the things that proponents of this will argue is, hey, like it's not like it's this random thing that's being taken. If it's my data, then there's value to it, so I shouldn't just have to give it up. And so her argument is there should be legislation, and right now we can look at the EU where they at least make it so you have to opt in. If every website you go to, if they're going to collect data, you have to say, okay, I'm okay with you taking this at the very least.
Which, you know, I always opt out when I'm on those UK sites, but it still is not, it's way better than it is here. But, you know, with the amount of data, you know, the companies, credit card companies have these political agencies, how can we be sure that our next election cycle next year will be protected, that we won't fall into the same trap again?
We can't. Not only can we not be sure of that, but now it's safe to assume now that other consulting firms are offering similar services. And in fact, if you look up some of the key words online, you can find them. They're saying we do psychographic modeling for political reasons. And so now, at least at the very least, maybe it's a more open playing field. If only the Trump campaign was doing it last time, or only the pro-Brexit campaign was doing it last time in England. Maybe this time around others are doing it, and I don't know if that's comforting, but...
Really isn't. It really isn't. But, you know, has anything changed, you know, since 2016? Were there any measures in the United States taken to fight this?
Nothing has changed in terms of new laws that make it less likely for all of this information to be collected on you. But at the very least now, there are senators like Mark Warner talks about this a lot. And there's a real movement at the very least to try to catch up to the EU and other countries in terms of the safety of our data and also the value of our data.
What was also interesting was that Kaiser revealed in her book that Cambridge Analytica was supporting the Trump campaign as well as also Ted Cruz's campaign. What do you make of that? Were you surprised?
This is so fascinating, right? It kind of shows you how successful the company was. It had been known previously that they had worked for Ted Cruz's campaign during the primary and for Trump's campaign during the general election. But what she reveals is that they were kind of secretly also providing guidance to Trump during the primary. And when you think about that field, that was more than a dozen very serious candidates. And neither one of them were the favorites to begin with, but they ended up coming first and second. And they were the two campaigns that were using this company and these methods in order to target people.
The more we dig on this, the more my mouth falls to the ground. And I think largely because I just feel like there's nothing we can do to stop this.
It seems inevitable, but at least people know now that that it's happening, and that in some ways it's being taken from them, and it should be theirs.
All right. Graham Cates, you can join us to break this all down. Great interview. And you can see, by the way, that second half of the interview with Brittany Kaiser later today on CBSN, 7 p.m. Eastern.